All right, coming down in 3, 2, 1, just for recording purposes. Welcome, everybody, especially those of you who are with us live this Friday morning at 9:30 in Chicago for the ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush. I guess technically I'm your host. We're co-hosts, but I tend to drive the bus sometimes, and it is my pleasure to welcome in my co-hosts, Kyle Nabors, who is our Group Sports Editor for Shaw Media, and Sean Hammond, our Chicago Bears Insider.com, Shaw Local, I should say, Bears Insider.com, Bears beat reporter. It is great to be back with you all this week. I'm sure some of you have noticed, hey, it's Bears Packers week. A little bit going on around the team, around the city, around the Midwest. Pretty exciting stuff. It always is. We will get to that in a few moments. It will be the focus of our conversation today. We assume that's what everybody wants to be focused on, but it's kind of hard this week in particular not to take a little longer look back, or at least a quick look back at last weekend, and not just a huge 20-11 win for the Bears over the Las Vegas Raiders, but the stories that attended it. In a way, the Bears were tangential to one of the biggest stories in the NFL in years. And obviously that started to break on the Friday before the game with the news of Jon Gruden's emails. And guys, we're not going to focus on it. We're certainly not the morality police, but we are reporters and it's news, and we haven't talked about it yet. So Kyle, I don't know that any of us actually gets to be the voice of Shaw Publications, but as our group sports editor, you certainly are in a position to take some positions. And so let's have you lead us off. I mean, just your thoughts about the subject and all that went on.
Well, I don't know what else to really say that hasn't been said. I mean, terrible, repugnant. I mean, it's kind of the classic case that you've come to expect when these things start to leak. It's it was a one-time thing. I'm really sorry. Then a couple days later, oh no, it wasn't a one-time thing. I'm really, really sorry. And then another few days, he's out the door. It's a clear cycle that we see in these situations. There's some understandable angst and anger that the NFL has withheld these emails from the public, which isn't surprising at all. But it's just interesting to see the PR storm that has kind of circled the NFL in Washington all week.
Yeah, I think, Sean, as reporters, Kyle just touched on something interesting there, because I get that, people feel like they're part of the story. They feel like they're part of the media these days with social media and all that. But I don't really understand what the theory is that 650,000 private emails should be released publicly. I think what we've learned is horrible enough. To me, I'm far more curious about who leaked it, and what their motives may have been. But as far as releasing the others, I'm not sure there's a reasonable connection there, particularly since the investigation is into the Washington football team, and Jon Gruden's never been a part of that organization.
Well, that's what needs to be released, Hub. You have this whole investigation into Washington, and it winds up bringing down a coach from a different team. I mean, what more was in there regarding some of these folks in Washington and what they were talking about and saying and doing? I mean, I think it was intentional that the NFL did asked for their report verbally and not written. And I don't think that's, I just don't like that. I don't like that there's no written record of what they found, and we're left here guessing what exactly was going on in Washington.
Well, yeah, I understand your point. And again, I think this is another case of we're all ready to get to the finish line. I do believe it's an ongoing investigation. I don't believe the final results have been released yet. Fines and punishment have not been meted out. And we have short memories. The way all these stories start, if you go back to Ray Rice, it was with a viral video. And if you go back to Deflategate, it was leaked intentionally. And while the league is going to drag its feet as best it can, eventually we're going to learn all, and I understand your point exactly, Sean, but a lot of the people who want these emails released, it's not because they care about what the Washington football team did. They're looking for other villains. They're looking for other Jon Grudens. And I don't know that it's reasonable to go on a witch hunt like that, because if you release all 650,000 emails, you're going to release a lot of other stuff about a lot of other people that isn't in the same vein as what happened with Jon Gruden, but could be personally damaging to them. So, Kyle, I think this is where it's tough, because this is not the January 6th insurrection. This is not, whether or not the election was stolen. This is not all of the, it's not whether there was anything right or wrong about the way we withdrew from Afghanistan. This is entertainment. These are private businesses, and they do, I think, probably have to be viewed a little bit differently than what we might expect, if these were actually impactful on the rest of society, maybe, is what I'm trying to say.
I think they have impact on society. I mean, considering how large a sport the NFL is, the amount of money it brings in. I understand that they don't have to, they are not under public scrutiny in terms of, FOIA or anything like that. But I mean, they listen, if the reason they don't release those emails is because, I mean, it clearly would make the situation, not releasing them. I think I saw a tweet somewhere about this, like not releasing them is like a 3 on the public relations scale of, screw ups. Releasing them is probably on a much higher scale. It becomes a bigger story because we know there's going to be more in there. I mean, 650,000 emails. We've already seen Adam Schefter get sideswiped in all of this, deservedly, but let's get back to the topic on hand. Jon Gruden, right? I mean, that's where we really want to go with this. And the question, I guess, I have for you guys: do you think that affected the Raiders' play at all? It broke on Friday, at least the original email. I don't think it was until Monday or Tuesday where additional emails and reports started to at least come out publicly. We don't know how much the roster knew outside of that original email, right, during the game on Sunday.
Well, Gruden claims that he had talked to the team twice, and that's been confirmed by Mike Mayock and others. And the temptation is to say the guy is not stupid. Obviously, the guy is stupid, or he never would have, written. This is where you got to draw that line again between being the morality police and just trying to cover it and analyze it. I find it hard to believe that somebody can say things like that and then in the next breath say, but I don't have a racist bone in my body, and then you get to now what we're finding out of the other homophobic comments and other things that went on. So it probably would be inaccurate to say he's not stupid. But at the same time, he can't have thought by talking to the team on Friday, because we know he talked to him Friday morning, that he could tell them there's just this one email that's all going to go away, because he already knew what was coming. So I think common sense suggests that the team knew more than just that one email. And even if it was just that one email, it had to have some impact on him. It's interesting that you get a player like Carl Nassib, who, and I realize, not related to this, different story. But when the homophobic comments come out, had to take a day away, and this is a guy, his job is to play football, but impacted badly enough. So between the racial and homophobic comments, Sean, we're never going to prove or know anything, but I find it impossible to believe this wasn't in the Raiders' heads on Sunday.
Yeah, they'll never say that, and you wouldn't expect pro athletes to say anything of that nature. But this was a big story over the weekend, and this was what a lot of people were talking about regarding the Raiders heading into this game, and whether or not it was affecting the players themselves. It certainly had to be affecting Gruden as he's coaching on that sideline. I mean, there was so much distraction in the days leading up to that game. I would be shocked if it didn't that throws you out of your routine. Whether that actually affects the way you're calling a game on Sunday, I don't know. I've never been in that position, but that certainly is going to throw you off your routine heading into that game. And you just don't want distractions like that when you're trying to win a football game.
Kyle, at the end of the day, I think where we have to kind of come down on this is that we will never measure the extent to which it might have impacted the game. Was it all 53 guys? Was it half a dozen or a dozen who may have been distracted, whatever it may be? But you just look at the game itself, and the Raiders historically are more than capable of committing 10 penalties for 82 yards that have a dramatic impact on the game. They're famous for it. But the number of drop passes was a little stunning. Now, I'm not suggesting that Brian Edwards is thinking about his coach being a racist when he drops a 30-yard pass as he's backpedaling, waiting for it. But the fact that there was probably half a dozen of them that you could count, there were times when I noticed they were really slow getting on and off the field. I think that they were impacted to some degree. Trying to measure how much that contributed to the Bears' victory is impossible. And also, no one is suggesting here that the Bears don't win the game were it not for that. They were clearly the better team. But as we try and weigh, the impact that it had on the game and therefore on the Bears going forward, you can't pretend that it wasn't a factor, because I think at some level it had to be.
Yeah, I think so. I completely forgotten about the Brian Edwards drop, by the way, which was one of the worst drops I've ever seen in an NFL game.
It was so bad.
I let out like an audible groan.
I mean, he had a full moment there to just stand and wait for the ball.
And if I wanted to be a smartass, I'd say, yeah, he was waiting, then he saw the racist out of the corner of his eye and he dropped the ball. I mean, that's not, obviously what's happening in these games, guys. But and I don't want to even put the finger on Brian Edwards. I mean, we don't know who was thinking what. But as we look at what happened there, and as we try, because that's really our purpose today. If I didn't say it, I'll say it again. I already said it on TV. We can't be the morality police. We can't decide who reacts how to this. What I started to say at the top, I'm certainly not shy about my personal feelings. I've never particularly cared for Jon Gruden. And so this type of stupidity coming out doesn't shock me all that much. I don't know that he is a racist, but racist or not, you cannot say things like that. Now, I got one quick question for you, and then we can move on to more pleasant things. How do you like the rubber lips story? Because I'll give him a point for creativity. Okay, I mean, you know what I'm talking about? It's
the DeMaurice Smith.
His explanation of the comments he made.
You're saying the explanation is
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I said the story. Yeah, I should have said the explanation. I'm sorry. For those who haven't heard, Jon Gruden. I'm sorry, guys. Somebody won't quit. For those who haven't heard. Jon Gruden's explanation is that he can't stand dishonesty. He can't stand liars. And he has an expression for liars. He calls them rubber lips. And so that's what he meant by Michelin tires. Now, it's creative, but I don't buy it, not for a second, but I shouldn't even laugh about something like this. But that's when this stuff starts getting that crazy, you look at the other side of it. This is a man who has a whole lot of black and brown people who've relied greatly on him for their careers and put their trust in him and had great success, who he's interacted with every day. It's hard for me to believe that he's a stone cold racist, but it's pretty obvious that he's a stone cold idiot, for saying things like that, and then for leaving him for posterity by putting him in print and emailing him. And then all the other emails start to come out and the homophobic stuff. You can't defend that. There's no rubber lip story for that. No. And again, I'm not trying to be cute or clever about any of this. So I think he got exactly what he deserved. And by the way, he wasn't fired. He quit for all these people who are starting with their cancel culture crap. And then you move to the next step. I think forgiveness is important, and I think anybody who wants to forgive him absolutely is in a good place and probably should. And, what more do we need to say about it?
Yeah, just to piggyback kind of off what you were saying there. I mean, you can't, in any profession, in any walk of life, you can't act one way and say things behind closed doors that are totally different. And I agree that, he got everything he deserved. And in the way that this played out, and when you got a team of, I don't know the numbers exactly, what percentage of their team is people of color, but you can't say things if you got things like that were said behind closed doors. I don't care if it's 10 years ago. I mean, he's going to lose all credibility, from those players and from those people who are looking toward him to be their leader.
Yeah, Kyle, let me throw in one more thing here and we'll move on. When I really do believe strongly that forgiveness is important when people earn it, and so I'm not offering an opinion on whether people should forgive Jon Gruden or not, but I do think, that I need to be clear. I admire forgiveness. I think it's great. I try and do it wherever I can, but that's for people who earn it. And so I think where we're at with this story right now is what is Jon Gruden going to do to earn that? And I think that's probably, unless you guys have anything else to add where we want to leave the story, Kyle. I don't know.
I think the thing I'll add there is this is kind of a case, and you see it over and over, where a person in position of power yeah, I guess I should say that we don't know it's the case, but what you often see as the case is they're able to get away with this type of behavior for quite a while because of the position that they're in. And it's unfortunate. But it's going to take a while to really find out. We've already seen a couple former players start to come out and say that, this is the type of behavior that they had experienced with Jon Gruden, and that they didn't feel like they really could say anything. And that's the kind of thing that really starts to get a little bit disturbing. It's going to take months, I think, before we really know the extent of what went on with Jon Gruden.
I do think it's worth noting here, guys, that Mike Tirico is a friend of mine. We're not close friends, but we've been broadcast partners on occasion for Westwood One and have known each other for many years because Mike lived in Ann Arbor for a long time. Actually, after I was done in school there, but I'd see him around town. We'd go back for things. And as you know, he was Gruden's broadcast partner for, what was it, 7 or 8 years, and has given an impassioned defense of the man. So, I mean, I think that, all of that stuff has to be measured, not by us here today and not in the court of public opinion. He has some repair work to do, minimally, and whether we ever hear from him again or how he reemerges, on the big NFL stage remains to be seen. But again, this is what makes this such an impossible subject for those who are not actually a part of it. I mean, I know Mike, knows Jon Gruden a hell of a lot better than I do. And also, obviously, not to say it, African-American and can't imagine that the guy is a racist. So that's why I kind of default to stupidity rather than racism. But regardless, it's all unacceptable. It is a sad chapter for the NFL. It gets back to, in fairness, another reason that so many people want these emails released is they're just making the leap to, well, it's probably going to root out a bunch of other racists or idiots. I don't know if it is or not, and whether they should be released or not is a conversation for a different time. Again, the NFL certainly has no obligation to do it. There is actually one other piece of the story, though. We talked about this on the Pro Football Weekly TV show today that I do think is interesting, is the fact that those emails were released a couple hours before the 32 player reps voted on whether to extend DeMaurice Smith's contract for another 3 years or to open it up for a search for his replacement. The reason that vote was held is because normally it can be done just by the executive committee, but the executive committee was tied 7-7 on not renewing the contract. So there were at least 7 votes against. He needed 22 votes. He got 22 votes. That means there were 10 votes against. Might there have been an 11th or a 12th? Did this impact that vote? Much like we discussed, did it impact, the Chicago Bears-Raiders game? I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. I'm not suggesting that it did, but it's certainly a question that you have to ask. And as I said, I think right at the top, to me, from the news perspective, the part of the story that intrigues me the most is who leaked this stuff, and will we ever know? And so I think at the moment, that's where we have to leave this story, because there's still more unanswered questions than there are answered ones, unless you guys have any thoughts on that piece of it.
No, not really. I think it's time to get into some Bears talk here. We've spent enough time trying to analyze the Jon Gruden situation for my liking. It's it's going to take a while for it to play out, and we got some good stuff here in the question. So, want to go ahead and dive in?
Well, yeah, that was a nice way of Kyle said, Hub, you're ripping another layer off the onion. We probably ought to stop here. So yes, and we can certainly see from our comments, Kyle, that there's more interest in the Bears Packers than there is in Jon Gruden or any of what's going on there. So why don't you go ahead and steer us where you want to go?
Let's get with our friend Hairless Yoda here.
Hairless Yoda wants to know, with Damian Williams being out due to the COVID protocol, do you expect the Bears to lean heavily on Khalil Herbert? Or will they start to scheme more of a passing attack than the last 2 games? Well, Yoda, they're going to lean very heavily on Khalil Herbert, because while I've always been fascinated to see what Ryan Nall would do given a chance in an NFL game, that even though he's made the team 3 straight years, he's never been given, they obviously aren't comfortable giving him that chance. Now, he's going to have to spell Khalil Herbert. There's no question about that. And I suppose it's likely that Artavis Pierce gets flexed off the practice squad too. You're not going to go in with just 2 healthy running backs. But the question is, will they, forget the running game that has made them so successful the last couple of weeks. You can't because that's why you've won the last 2 weeks. You can't because that's where a lot of the improvement in your offensive line is coming from. And you can't because Justin Fields doesn't appear to be ready for it yet. And that's why they've been doing it in the first place. So, Sean, will they run the ball 39 times, 43 times as they've done a couple times? No, I'm sure they won't. But I don't see them, passing first and running second. And I don't see them letting, Justin Fields drop back 35 or 40 times.
No, they're going to try to stick with this same game plan that they've used the last few weeks. And that's going to mean a lot of Khalil Herbert, yes. But that's, like Hub was saying, that's also going to mean Ryan Nall. And I fully expect Artavis Pierce to be on the active roster this week. And you're right. They haven't really given Nall too many chances to carry the ball. Artavis Pierce had a couple more carries than him all of last season. So I would expect a lot of Khalil Herbert. They're going to need to give him some rest here and there. Last week it was pretty evenly split between Williams and Herbert, and that's an ideal situation, but I don't know that they necessarily have the personnel to be able to do that this week.
Yeah, let's keep in mind, Kyle, that Sean is absolutely right. But if my memory serves me, that couple more was Pierce had 6 and Nall had 2, and they were both on the roster all year long.
Very low for both of them.
Well, and they were on the team all year long. So that tells you, what they think. Whereas Khalil Herbert is a rookie in his first meaningful game, gets 18 carries, so he is going to have to carry the load. And no, I don't think they're going to forget about him or get away from him at all.
I don't think so either. So next week against Tampa Bay is going to be the first time where the Bears face a run defense where I feel like they're going to have to rely much heavier on the pass. Now, this game could get away early from the Bears, and they have to switch to, going pass heavy. But they're going to come into a game plan against the Packers where it's going to be, I think, pretty evenly split 50-50, even a little heavier on the run when you factor in what I expect to be a pretty good run package for Justin Fields. I mean, this Packers defense is beatable in pretty much every facet at this point.
Yeah, they are, and again, I come back to the offensive line. Obviously the running backs matter, but when you see how interchangeable they appear to have been the last couple of weeks with Montgomery, Williams, and Herbert, it tells you that it can't be just the running backs that are creating all this, and so they have a chance to have some success. The trick is going to be not to lose patience, not to get away from it early, because the Packers are going to stack it early. The Packers are probably going to show up on the first play with 8-9 guys in the box, and if it works, they're going to stay that way. And so, what are your answers? I think that's going to be the bigger question. And actually, Bill Lazor, Sean, talked with us about that a little bit on Thursday. Said that that there were a lot of plays that he left on the play sheet, some stuff he had hoped to call that he didn't get to. He didn't feel that they got too run heavy, but that they're doing what it takes to win football games. And so I think more than anything, that was the big tip off. And again, this is not a knock on Justin Fields. He just has not shown yet that he can be the reason they win football games with his arm. The offense has shown it can win football games because of the running game, and so it's critical that they stay with it.
Yeah, and I think another interesting nugget here regarding the Bears' offense is we've seen this shift the last couple of weeks in the way that they're playing, but they haven't really had to play from behind, and I wonder how that might affect it at all if, say, they're down 7-10 points in the second half. Does that change? Do they have, like you were saying, do they have that commitment to the run? For the full game, because we've seen in the past with Nagy that it starts one way and doesn't necessarily end that way.
I mean, the Bears aren't going to ask Justin Fields to win them a game until they need to. Right now they're going to bring him along at a steady pace, continue to add piece by piece until they can't. When they fall behind, like you said, 7 or 10 points in the second half, the ball will be in Justin Fields' hand, but they're going to avoid that situation until they need to.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting also a couple things here. Number one, what is the best defense for Aaron Rodgers? It's time of possession, and the best way to own time of possession is to run the football. Number two, and this is it's not something you can rely on because the timing was off a little bit, but they lose Jeremiah Attaochu. They keep calling him Atuchu now or something, and it's Attaochu. I'm pretty sure is the correct pronunciation. And they signed 3 outside linebackers, 2 to the practice squad, all guys that have been around. They bring back Khalil's brother. They bring back Rashad, and they go for some depth there, even though you've got Travis Gibson already commanding more reps. Christian Jones can slide outside and play it, and Alec Ogletree can too. But they immediately beefed up when they knew they'd lost Adeocho for the year. Damian Williams goes on the COVID list, and they know he can't play this Sunday because it's at least 5 days. He doesn't go till Thursday, and they haven't added any more. Well, they signed Holyfield's kid, but obviously he's not going to step out and play. He has never even made an NFL team before, and I think that may have even been before the COVID test. Now the reports are that Williams has in fact tested positive, that this is not a close contact, and if he has in fact tested positive, there's no guarantee that he's going to be back a week from Sunday either, and so they're satisfied at the moment that they can get this done with Khalil Herbert and Ryan Nall and Artavis Pierce. And I think that's another indication that they're going to stick with the offense the way they've been running it.
One question I do have about Khalil Herbert is he was not targeted in the passing game at all last week. I don't know enough about him, to know if he can be a plus in that, or if that's going to be a situation where they do have Ryan Nall on the field more.
Yeah, I'm doing this from memory, but the scouting report didn't do a ton of it, but was good at it when he did it at Virginia. And the other thing about Herbert that's so tough is that most scouts basically threw out the 3 years at Kansas. You're looking at the 1 year at Virginia Tech, and so you're not going to have the numbers or the sample size that you want. But I do remember the scouting report saying didn't do as much of it as you might like, but definitely showed the hands to be successful at it. And what's funny about that, Kyle, also, what jumped out at me watching the game last Sunday, and then even more when I watched the tape, was I was impressed with his pass protection before I was impressed with his running. I mean, he had a couple blitz pickups that were really, as good as you could do it. And for a rookie in his first game, who couldn't have expected to have been out there as much as he was, particularly in those situations, you can't go nuts over one game. But pretty impressive stuff from him last week.
Yeah, agreed. Want to get into the Packers offensive line against the Bears pass rush. But before we do that, we got another question on the offensive side to jump into here. And I'll throw that up now, Hub.
This is from Thomas Klein. Tom, welcome to our podcast. Can you compare and contrast the offense the Bears are running now with the one Fox ran Mitch's rookie season? Is this one as simplified as that one? First of all, Thomas, we make the mistake of assuming something is simplified because we just figure these kids aren't, experienced enough yet and you have to keep it simple. And B, because if you're running more, it must be simplified. That's not necessarily the case. They have told us repeatedly that the thing they're impressed the most with Justin Fields is how far he's come, as quickly as he has, and how ready he is to do everything that he needs to do. And so I'm not just debating with you. I'm sure we know they don't have everything in for him. But I don't know that it's all that simplified. And my answer to your question is going to be a little smart ass. Forgive me if I can't help it. But anything that isn't the Dowell Loggins, offense probably isn't as simplified. So
that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, yeah, it's yes, they're running a simplified version of what they 6 or 7 weeks from now that they'll be running. But nothing will compare to that first season of Mitch's starts under John Fox.
Well, and by the way, guys, that wasn't Mitch's offense. That was Mike Glennon's offense. Remember, it was Mike's year. And these teams, you don't just change the offense when you change quarterbacks. You can't do that. That's not the way it works in the NFL. So I think, Tom, it's a good question. And Sean, I think where he was going is it's not that it's simplified so much as when you look at the game plan and the play sheet on Sunday, not everything is on it. Now, that doesn't mean I know of one instance where I was told, pretty good source off the record, actually twice that he told me they ran plays that were not practiced during the week, that were not a heavy part of the game plan. So they're not afraid to do it, if they need to. But he isn't running the whole playbook, to Tom's point. And I don't, much like, sticking to the run game, I just don't see that changing all that much this week.
Yeah, I don't see it changing. And that's interesting what you said, Hub. Was that regarding the Raiders game specifically?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, they have to be flexible too, because situations arise and you need to be able to adjust to these things. But I would expect it to continue to look like it has in recent weeks, and whether that means it's it's simplified or not, this is what they got to do to win some football games right now.
Yeah, you go back to 2018, guys, when everybody thought Matt Nagy was the second coming and he was the coach of the year, and we were seeing, Willy Wonka and Santa's sleigh and Oompa Loompa and all that. That stuff, those special plays usually are in the game plan. Those get practice. You don't just pull them out on Sunday. But there's stuff like that they practice in training camp. Every once in a while they do it in practice, but it's never part of the game plan. But you got to be ready to pull it out. And I think in a given situation, possibly even in a red zone situation or a key third down, they'll do stuff like that. It's not like Fields doesn't have the whole offense. What they're doing, Kyle, is they're play calling to try and make him successful. And maybe it's a too fine a distinction I'm trying to make here, but I don't want people to think that that it's simplified because Fields can't handle it, or they don't trust him, or they don't think he can. It's just the development process he's going through. He has the whole playbook, and they're opening more of it up each week, as opposed to when people started talking about simplifying and dumbing things down. It's when Mitch started to slip after 2018, his first full year. It wasn't in that first year with Fox.
And I don't know how much of it is on the quarterback overall, and how much of it is on some of this concept that the Bears want to run, or that Matt Nagy wants to run. They just haven't been successful at too. Like back in 2018, you mentioned like that inside pitch to the tight end near the goal line was a fantastic play, a play that we see Andy Reid run like 3 times a week, I feel like. Pretty much since then, the Bears have not been able to execute anything like that. No matter who the quarterback is. And speaking of quarterbacks, I like the Mike Glennon reference there, because I did not realize Mike Glennon was still in the league until Daniel Jones went out on Sunday and Mike Glennon came trotting on. And I was like, there's a perfect example of why it's great to be a backup quarterback in the NFL. How that guy is still cashing a paycheck, I don't know, but good for Mike Glennon.
Well, and the other thing, guys, and this is not a comparison. Please don't go there, people. I'm just making the point when you look at the numbers as far as developing these kids, because now 4 or 5 years later, Mike Glennon came off the sideline, having not played in Lord knows how long, and put up much better numbers than Justin Fields. He's not nearly as good. He shouldn't be in the same conversation. That's not the point here. It's a point about what it takes to develop these young men. I was looking at something, and I don't mean to get off the track here, but I found this really intriguing. Pretty soon, and I think that you guys both just touched on it. Kyle, I think you talked about the Tampa game. Sean said it's got to be coming in a couple of weeks where they put it on him. Pretty soon, he's going to have to be judged more on his numbers than his development. But what struck me was I was checking some numbers, and I take that back. 4 of the 5 lowest rated quarterbacks in the NFL right now are 4 of the 5 rookie starters. It's only Mac Jones, who's a little bit better, and he's 21st or 22nd or something like that. They all have a lot more production than Justin Fields. None of them have good numbers. They all have more turnovers than Justin Fields. And so, what the Bears are doing with his development, because of where they're at, as opposed to those other teams, is they're more focused on limiting his mistakes than asking him to be the difference in the game. And they're hoping that his natural ability will let him be the difference in the game. And that's kind of the normal course of development with these young quarterbacks.
The other thing I want to bring up here, too, is Sean wrote about it in Bear Down Nerd Up, his column he writes, where he kind of goes through the numbers really closely each week. Allen Robinson was it the lowest separation in the league?
Yeah,
Sean. Yeah, the lowest separation from a defender.
Among guys who had 15 targets or something.
So there's your number one receiver who's getting a lot of attention and struggling to get separation because of all that attention. You're using your tight ends in blocking situations. Cole Kmet and Jimmy Graham, for the most part, have not been all that involved in the passing game. Darnell Mooney's probably been your most consistent receiver, and you've gotten pretty much nothing outside of those top 2 receivers. So how much of it is, the training wheels on Justin Fields, and how much of it is you have not had, a lot of explosive plays coming from your receiving core?
Well, it's all of the above, obviously. To suggest it's just on Fields or just on the play calling or just on the receivers is impossible. I am curious, Sean, and just because this is kind of a sore spot with me, not with you, but when we say lowest separation, where does that number come from?
From NFL Next Gen Stats.
Okay. I'm not disputing it. We have become all smarter than we can possibly be, because we now all have so much more information that people are compiling, and we don't have enough information on who's compiling it and what it really means. And it could very well be that that's true. I'm not debating the point. But
I mean, that's not a knock on Allen Robinson. That just shows how defenses are playing.
No,
Allen Robinson.
No, that is a knock on Allen Robinson, and I'm not criticizing anybody for it. But if you have the lowest separation rate in the league and it's real, then you're not, the franchise tag receiver, multi-year contract that you want to be. I mean, we can't really have it both ways. It's okay to knock Allen Robinson.
I don't think it is a knock. Like I said,
I think it goes both ways, though. I mean, you say it can't go both ways, but A, he's being covered like a blanket, and yes, you could argue B, okay, well, he should be able to get open. And it's funny, like we see, I think it was 1.7 yards is his average separation. They measure it in yards, and it seems like every time he's making a catch, there's like 3 guys draped on him this season. He's always in traffic.
This is why you can't just take those next gen stats. And Sean, you didn't. I'm not criticizing anybody here, but that was a great example of why you have to be so careful with that, because it does seem like that, but 1.7 yards is plenty of separation for an NFL quarterback. And so then you move to the next question is, okay, so does Fields not know, because he's used to having 3 yards of separation at Ohio State, that he's got to put that ball in there? When we say, I find now I'm going to question the stat. If a 1.7 yard average separation is the worst in the NFL, what, guys are open by 5-10 yards on average? I mean, that strikes me as pretty strange.
1.7 is the yardage when the ball leaves the quarterback hand for its intended target. So guys are obviously
between the receiver and the nearest defender.
So obviously the defender is going to close that distance between when the ball leaves the quarterback's hand and when it arrives. So 1.7. I mean, within 2 yards when the ball is leaving the quarterback hand, on let's say it's like a 12-yard, post route or something like that, or in route, that 1.7 yard is not a lot of ground for that defender to be able to make up.
No, I'm not arguing that point, but I'm just saying if that's the worst in the league, then there's an awful lot of wide open receivers running around who people aren't throwing the ball to. That just, I mean, and hey, 1.7 yards, in that, what does it take to throw a ball 18 yards? Is that 2 seconds? I mean, how long does it take to get the ball there? It's a fair amount of ground to make up, assuming you're both moving at full speed. Again, we don't know. We're kind of I'm getting us caught up in the weeds here.
Let me just give you some reference here. The guys with the most separation, they aren't exactly the guys that you wanna cover super closely anyway. We're talking about Rondale Moore, Freddie Swain, Adam Humphries, Braxton Berrios, Jonnu Smith. I mean,
Rondale Moore is uncoverable. Let's just say that. No, I'm joking, but the kid is
Rondale Moore has been Kyle's guy for about a year now, guys. Just so everybody knows.
Yeah, right. So my point is, like, it maybe says more about the coverage than it does about the receiver.
Well, it said, my only point is it says it's not an answer to the question is all I'm saying, because it brings everybody in. I think when a passing game is as bad as the Bears is right now, it's got to be everybody. It's got to be the receivers. It's got to be the quarterback. It's got to be the offensive line. And we're caught up in this aura around Justin Fields that there's this desire by many to make it about everybody but the kid. And that's not the way you develop him. You focus on what he's got to do better, because he can do better. And then you teach him how to do it. Who was I listening to? It was a player. It was a good player yesterday who had a comment about Justin Fields is learning the difference between NFL open and college open. And what he was talking about specifically was the windows you've got to throw into and trust the receivers to make it. And so this is an example of, now you don't know, when is he right not to throw the ball in there? When is he wrong for not throwing? I don't know. It's something that they have to improve on everywhere. And you can't answer it just by replacing the receivers. The bigger question to me, guys, is how can these guys be covered? You brought Marquise Goodwin, you brought Damiere Byrd here because of their speed. Nobody's disputed that. You brought them here to threaten the defense, to back it up, to try and take the top off. And yet these guys are a non-factor. And now we're saying that you're double or triple covering Allen Robinson because he's the only guy. So it could be just a systemic breakdown in the Bears passing attack. I don't know, but it seems a little strange to me that you add all that speed and the whole purpose is to take the top off the defense, and defenses don't think they have to cover them. So they're going to double, Robinson and Mooney. That's kind of a hard equation to make work.
To me, that just says that, despite the fact that I really like Marquise Goodwin, that him and Damiere Byrd just aren't very good.
Well, all right. So, I don't know how long we archive stuff at shawlocal.com, but since Kyle got his Rondale Moore point in, I think I wrote a week after they got him that these are two, unfortunately, somewhat failed NFL wide receivers. I mean, Marquise Goodwin, 7 years, had the one incredible year in San Francisco, but wasn't a factor his other seasons in the league. And Damiere Byrd had a, almost average year as the number one target in New England last year, and that's it for him in 5 years. So, no, they're not special. But still, Kyle, it begs the question, you knew that when you signed him. You brought him here to have him sprint down the field and take coverage away. And now we're saying, well, teams aren't even covering them. So that's kind of a damning, and they're both good kids. I hate to go, I'm not going after them, but it's just reasonable analysis.
Listen, I was the guy screaming pretty much every time in the weeks leading up to the draft that the Bears needed to take a wide receiver. So, yeah, I mean, they're just not good enough at the position.
Well, we got I know a number more questions. Kyle, is there anything you like here?
Yeah, really quickly, Marty Deck pointed out that Mike Glennon played last year in Jacksonville, and I didn't remember that because I try and not remember any time the Jacksonville Jaguars play, but
threw the goofiest touchdown of the season last year, probably. Do you remember that? It bounced off like 4 people or something.
I don't.
Or was it an interception? I can't remember, actually.
Yeah, and I want to say he played the year before in Arizona too. I mean, he hasn't been a starter, but he has had to start a few games.
I see. I think he started a few games during. Yeah. I mean, Jacksonville threw about every person out there, I think, last year.
He started a few games there last year, and I think he may have started one in Arizona, since he left the Bears too.
So we got a question here. We're talking about wide receivers. Rick Gonzalez with a good question here.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. I saw a Geno Smith question in the comments. I was trying to figure out where we're going there. That's not Rick's question. Does Jalen Johnson shadow Davante Adams this week? Rick, I hope not, because that's not the way that you deal with Davante Adams. Jalen Johnson is coming fast, guys. He's playing really well. They're starting to talk about him around the league now. But Davante Adams is one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in football right now. And there is no corner, including Jalen Ramsey, who's going to, lock him down for 60 minutes. And then by taking the Bears' best coverage guy, away, having him do nothing but shadow Davante Adams, it's probably not the best way to attack this. I think what you have to hope the Bears do is that they double Davante Adams on every play, that they don't travel Jalen Johnson, that when he's on Jalen's side, that it's Jalen with help from a safety or a nickel. When he's on Vildor's side, it's with help from a safety or a nickel. And then, you double him and you take away the other options. I would double him. I would try and take away Randall Cobb. I would try and take away Valdez-Scantling and Tanyan, and then force Rodgers to throw into double coverage. He's going to beat that sometimes too, but you're making it a lot more difficult. That to me would be the logical approach, but I'm not Sean Desai, and he's a lot better at this than I am, Sean.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Jalen Johnson earlier this week. He said Raiders Casey Hayward came up to him before the game and was like, "Hey, I like your game," and Jalen's like, I didn't even know he knew who I was, and so yeah, he's getting more recognition across the league from his peers and obviously from folks like us who are watching these games from an outside perspective. But yeah, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is going to pick on the Bears' weakest links in that secondary, and you could put Jalen Johnson on Davante Adams all game long if you want, but he'll be totally happy to go in a different direction if he can pick on the Kindle Vildors or the Duke Shelleys of the Bears defense.
I don't think you necessarily need to shadow Davante Adams with Jalen Johnson. Hub is right. You do need to find a way to bracket him, double team him. If we go back to week 17 of last year, though, I think it was week 17 when the Bears played Green Bay, didn't Davante Adams get loose several times because he ended up matched up against Danny Trevathan? Am I remembering that
no,
correctly?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I think that is a situation which probably is what spawned Rick's question. That is the situation you have to rectify. You cannot allow Davante Adams to end up in the slot, crossing the middle of the field with a linebacker trying to chase him down. That just isn't going to work.
Yeah, and I think that the natural fear is that your slot corner is Duke Shelley, who, by the way, small steps, but he's gotten a little bit better each week. Marquis Christian got his shot against the Rams, was awful. Shelley came out and was equally awful week 2 against the Bengals. But since they've stuck with Shelley. Christian gets his occasional reps too, but it's Shelley's your primary nickel. He's gotten a little better, each week. Kindle Vildor is also definitely playing better. They're not in Jalen Johnson's league. But the Bears' young corners, this is off the subject, but they're starting to show you why they decided that Kyle Fuller, who the main reason was because he gave them the most cap relief of any contract on the board, but another reason why they were comfortable moving on. And Adams does most of his damage from the slot. Now, these are not pure matchups. The nickel doesn't always end up on the slot receiver, but it's going to happen more often than not. And so I think that Shelley is probably going to be the principal defender on Johnson, and then they have to be able to double him. And I think it's a mistake to try and double him with a linebacker. I think you got to commit a safety. It's got to be the nickel and a safety, and that's your best chance of taking him away.
How much do we trust the Bears safeties? Obviously, they've improved a lot since week 1. But going back to last year, we know Eddie Jackson really struggled. I think my biggest fear and the biggest fear of Bears fan is you're going to see a Devontae Adams streaking behind the defense because there's blown coverage. I think this is probably the best passing attack the Bears have faced since week 1, Matthew Stafford and having Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I think that's something you got to worry about too, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can't ignore the film we've seen from this team for the last 18, 19 games. But again, Eddie Jackson's another one who he is playing better this year.
He is,
and I completely trust Tayshaun Gibson. I do not think he'll blow a coverage. He's not the athlete that Jackson is, but I couldn't be more impressed with this guy. But it's absolutely a fair point, Kyle. The one Achilles heel for the Bears defense so far this year, Sean, has been the blown coverages.
Yeah, that's what hurt them, against the Rams especially. And, I think we're seeing a little bit with Kindle Vildor and Bush. These guys just needed a little bit more experience and time. And sure, it's a work in progress, but I don't think we're going to see the blown coverages quite like what we saw in that Rams game again. Now I say that they'll probably let me down and pull something like that, but they've made progress since that first game.
Well, and Kyle, it's funny. I'm remembering now as you say that this surprised me a little bit, and I think it was an accident. It was in the heat of the emotion after the game. But the big drop from Bryan Edwards, he had 2 that were just horrible, and I think there was a third. But the obvious one was when he was all alone, 40 yards downfield, and you see Jalen Johnson come running. And after the game, Eddie Jackson, I'm positive, accidentally threw Johnson under the bus because he was kind of laughing about it. He said, "Yeah, it was Jalen's guy," and he came running back and like, "Where did he come from?" and whatever. But the point is that Johnson, who's the best of the bunch, apparently blew that coverage. So it can happen to anybody. But you just have to hope that they're as focused as they can be Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we get here toward the 50-minute mark, I know we got to wrap it up. I mentioned earlier, kind of the place I want to end this on, or where I want to leave it on, is I want to talk a little bit. To me, we know what we're going to get out of the Bears offense, or at least we have a pretty good idea of what they want to do. I think this game comes down to the Bears' ability to pressure Aaron Rodgers, move him off his spot. We've seen a lot better production out of Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack. Just looking at, I was looking at the Packer depth chart at offensive line, and I knew that there were a lot of new faces, but I'm actually a bit shocked by the amount of turnover along the offensive line for the Packers over the last pretty much 2 seasons now.
Well, as far as the turnover, that's really just salary cap stuff. And it started when they made David Bakhtiari the highest paid left tackle in football. And so, they couldn't keep their all-pro center, Corey Linsley, and were comfortable that they had answers. They had hoped that Lane Taylor would give them more at guard, and he became more of a journeyman than an NFL starter. They've had several right tackle experiments after moving on from Brian Bulaga, most notably, I guess, Ricky Wagner, and that didn't work out. They got Billy Turner out there, who's just, he plays up and down the line, but he came to them as kind of a failed journeyman from Denver. And Bakhtiari, I don't know if he's going to be ready next week, but he's the Tariq Cohen story. Instead of starting on IR, he started on the PUP list, so he's just not eligible the first 6 weeks. So this being week 6, obviously the Bears are catching them at an ideal time. I don't know if Bakhtiari will be back next week or not. But I think to Kyle's point, Sean, the Packers have had a lot of trouble protecting Rodgers. Now, interestingly enough, in the game where we thought it was going to be the worst, which I think was the 49er game, he handled Nick Bosa pretty well. They handled, I should say, because they move a few guys in and out of there. They had the third string guy in that night. But the Bears are the number 1 pass rush in the NFL. And so there's no reason to assume that they're not going to be able to create some real pressure against this struggling offensive line. That said, there is no more dangerous quarterback in the NFL when you force him out of the pocket than Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, the Packers offense is ranked 17th right now in sacks per pass attempt, which is very pedestrian. And you kind of look at their offense as a whole, and the numbers certainly aren't living up to what the standard that they set last year. They're kind of in the middle of the pack in most of these categories. And to me, that just says, yes, they have Aaron Rodgers. Hub, you're right. He's dangerous in any situation. But this offense is a little bit more beatable than maybe it was last year, at least early in the season. By the end of the year, that might not be the case. But certainly you don't want to, Aaron Rodgers can beat you any day of the week, I guess.
Well, Kyle, here's the other piece: is if you study the Packers tape, the last 4 or 5 weeks, their answer to their offensive line problems have been exactly the same as the Bears. Their number of runs and their rushing yardage has increased each week. A.J. Dillon, he was my Rondale Moore, by the way, 2 years ago. I just loved that kid and was hoping the Bears would think about it in the second round. Is becoming a pretty good NFL running back. And Aaron Jones is special. Aaron Jones is probably the most underrated player in the NFL. And I get it because of Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, but you better not sleep on him. And what's intriguing about that is if you'd have told me that without Akeem Hicks, the Bears were going to be able to handle Josh Jacobs and the Raiders run game the way they did last week, I would have said no way. That's something that had nothing to do with Jon Gruden or distractions or penalties or anything else. The Bears run defense stood up without Akeem Hicks and handled what could be a pretty good running game, possibly the equivalent of the Packers running game last week.
There's so many things I want to hit on here. First off, going back to the Packers last year, I thought they were the best team in the NFC North, but I do think that they overperformed what they were actually capable of on a year-to-year basis. I think we're seeing the regression that like I said, still the best team in the NFC North, but not a 13-3 team that we saw. I do think the Bears rush defense is arguably the best defense or rush defense in the NFL. Probably behind Tampa, I guess I should say. I think probably the second best rush defense in the NFL. I think it's legit. I think teams are going to struggle to run against the Bears. Overall, this is another matchup where I think it's pretty favorable for the Bears. I don't think they win this game, unlike last week where I actually thought they were going to beat Las Vegas. But I do think that this is going to be a game that sets up where the Bears should be in it in the fourth quarter.
Kyle, let me just quickly throw in here, and I want to see another week or two before I really am positive what the Bears have on defense. But I'll take their run defense over Tampa's because there's a difference there. Tampa's run defense is number 1 because their pass defense is 32. The Bears can stop you both ways. And Tampa's run defense is really good. Believe me, I wouldn't want to try and run against it every week. But the numbers start to get skewed a little bit when your pass defense is that bad, and the Bears don't have that big a problem, or the same problem defending the pass.
Yeah, it also helps when teams are 2 touchdowns behind you most of the time. So yeah, that's a fair point.
Sean, you looked like you were going to weigh in there. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was just what I was going to hit on. Yeah, the Bears are middle of the pack in both those categories. Actually, they rank 12th in rush defense and pass defense.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all I had.
The Bears defense, the numbers are a little bit skewed only because that Rams game got out of hand early and then you're chasing it all week long. Not that the rankings are that critical. It's more important how you're playing right now. But the Bears defense is definitely a little better than it's rated in terms of NFL rankings. Guys, we are out of time. It's been almost an hour. I do apologize to our listeners for spending as much time on the Jon Gruden fiasco as we did, but just a huge story, and you have to talk about it and cover it. We're done with it. I doubt that it will come up again on this podcast unless there's more breaking news. It is Bears-Packers week. We'd prefer that you get to shawlocal.com for our predictions every week, but you certainly get them here each week as well as we sign off. And I just realized I haven't sent you mine yet, Kyle, but I'll make it now. Sean, why don't you go ahead and go first while I figure out what I'm going to write and send it to Kyle.
Yes, I believe I had the Packers 24-17. I like Kyle, as Kyle said a few minutes ago. I think this is a game that the Bears will be in. I think they can be in it in the fourth quarter. I think their pass rush can make life hard on Aaron Rodgers. I just don't know if their offense is going to be able to keep up at this point, especially with, you got a rookie running back starting. He had a good start last week, but let's see how it goes when he has to be the guy for a week.
Kyle?
Yeah, I'm going to take the Packers to win 20-13. I think the Bears make life pretty miserable on Aaron Rodgers. I think you're still 3 or 4 weeks from Justin Fields being in a position where he's ready to beat teams that are clearly better than the Bears. And until they get to that point, I can't pick the Bears to beat what like I said, I think is a clearly better team.
Yeah, guys, this is I'm going to take the Packers to win the game. I haven't even figured out a score yet, and I know some people want to hear this because of the point spread. I recommend you never bet against point spreads because the house always wins, but some people do, and that's up to you. And I do think the Bears will keep it a game. I think the number on this was like 4 or 5 points, and you never know what's going to happen in those last couple minutes depending on the way the game is going. So, but I see the Bears making a game of it. Now whether the final score is within 2, 3, 4 points, I don't know. I'd like to pick them. I think it's exciting what happened last week. I've been saying all year long, I think they're underrated. I don't think they're necessarily a good football team, but they definitely have more talent than they get credit for. And you've seen some of that the last couple of weeks. And I think the Packers are overrated. But Aaron Rodgers is the difference. He is always the difference. And we're waiting for that moment when Justin Fields will be, and there's a good chance that it's going to happen. But there's nothing we've seen the last 3 or 4 weeks to suggest that explosion could come this week, except for the fact that the Packers aren't very good on defense. And then one last thing, guys, just for a quick thought from each of you, is the Mike Pettin factor. And it was brought up a couple times around Hallis Hall. Matt Nagy, said he appreciated having Coach Pettin on his staff, but kind of downplayed the impact. Sean Desai, on the other hand, said, yeah, he obviously knows a little bit about him. So I don't think there's any magic, answer or secret that they're going to get from Pettin that changes it. But I do think there's a chance that this Bears team, which is probably a little closer to the Packers than they've been the last couple of years in terms of how they're playing right now, could also get a boost from his presence. But at the end of the day, I can't find a reason to say that the Bears are going to beat Aaron Rodgers on Sunday.
Yeah, the best thing I think you can say about it is Bears fans can go into this game feeling like it's going to be a game, which a couple weeks ago, I don't think any of us would have been able to say.
And Sean, I think the last piece for me is that I kind of knew all along I was going to take the Packers. I was looking for reasons to take the Bears, and there are reasons. But the last straw was Williams, and losing him. I think Khalil Herbert's going to be fine, but you don't win in the NFL with one running backs these days. I mean, everybody's doing it with 2 or 3. And I've been dying to see Ryan Nall. I think we may finally get a chance, but I can't predict it's going to be great without knowing what we're going to see.
Yeah, maybe this is the time for the Nall fans out there. You really like the 1-2 punch they had last week. It's an unfortunate situation that Williams isn't going to be available for this one because those guys worked really well together and they shared that load well. I just they tested Herbert last week and now he's going to get a real test.
All right, so let's make one more prediction. It'll be quick and we'll say goodbye. Kyle, does Ryan Nall have a Jesper Horsted moment?
No, no. Although, maybe, first touchdown, go ahead and throw that bet in and see if you can.
Oh, no, I wasn't talking about, I wasn't talking about bets. I was just saying that, Jesper Horsted shows up and catches a touchdown last week and everybody's like, what was he doing out there? You didn't even expect to see him. That's kind of the Ryan Nall thing too. So
two snaps last week. And he made the most of it. He had 2 snaps last week.
Yeah, I mean that's probably what Ryan Nall's going to get, even though I hope I'm wrong. So we'll see what happens. I will tell you that, to my knowledge, nobody on this podcast is betting this week, so we'll see what happens. Guys, we have to say goodbye. There's nothing better, we go to ShawLocal.com and read some of Sean's stuff, and even a piece or two of mine from this week. The Bears-Packers rivalry, it's as special as it gets in the NFL. The numbers you can throw around. The 203rd meeting, and this is my favorite stat. It's not a significant stat, but it's just fun. In 203 games, the difference in points is 0.34 points a game. It's not even half a point a game. Now, that's skewed because there's been a lot of 20, 30-point wins on either side. But at the end of the day, to play 203 games and have it be that close, the Packers currently lead the series by 6 games. I want to say it's 200 to 194, and then they're 1-1 in the playoffs. But what are the odds on even that? And that's because the Packers have won 16 of the last 19. I mean, you could have argued it was skewed the other way until a couple decades ago, and the thing is 11 decades old. So I believe it's the greatest rivalry in all of sports. I couldn't be looking forward to it anymore. I hope you are all as well. And for our Bears fans, we hope that it comes out the way you want. For our Packers fans, we hope you enjoy the game. Can't go so far as to say I hope it comes out the way you want, but we hope you enjoy the game. And we thank you for being with us this week. Remember, you can go to the App Store on your phone, to iTunes, to ShawLocal.com to download a subscription to our podcast, so it comes to you automatically each week. For those of you who have been joining us live stream, we appreciate it. Tell your friends. They can jump in too and get questions into the podcast. And now we'll see what happens Sunday and be back with you again next Friday morning. Have a great weekend, everybody.